Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are taking a truly fascinating journey through a really unique piece of source material. We're going to examine Deformed Buddha's 2006 text, Summary of Reincarnation. And what makes this specific framework so incredibly captivating is how it approaches a deeply spiritual concept, human destiny and the afterlife, but starts with something you'd normally find in like a high school science classroom. We are literally going to trace a path that begins with the laws of physics and ends with the ultimate spiritual fate of the human soul. Let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this. Right off the bat, the text hits us with this quote. Without external forces, a moving object would continue in a straight line at a constant speed along its initial direction forever. Now, if that sounds familiar, it's because it's essentially just basic Newtonian physics, right? But the source unexpectedly uses this physical law as a metaphor, and a really brilliant one at that, to lay the groundwork for understanding human destiny. The text explains that just as objects in space are subjected to external forces that dictate their movement, human lives are subjected to forces that shape a fixed, highly predictable trajectory. To unpack this framework today, we're going to follow a clear 5-step path. 1. The physics of destiny. 2. Awakening spiritual perception. 3. The celestial realms. 4. Earthly and human returns. And finally, 5. Descending to lower realms. So, starting off with part 1, the physics of destiny and the fixed trajectory of life. The text asserts that before a person undergoes any sort of spiritual awakening, their destiny just follows a rigid, set orbit. Think back to that physics metaphor we just talked about. Because an unawakened person is really just reacting to external forces, right, without creating their own conscious spiritual momentum, their path is entirely predictable. It's basically set in stone. The source makes a really great comparison here. It states that just like an astronomer can accurately predict a planet's orbit by looking at its mass and gravity, a wise fortune teller can predict an unawakened person's future life path with a surprisingly high degree of accuracy. Because the trajectory is fixed, the future is, well, it's essentially already written. But what if you actually want to break out of that orbit? That brings us to section 2, awakening spiritual perception. Here, the source defines enlightenment in a very specific, actionable way. It literally calls enlightenment the activation of one's own spiritual perception. According to the text, the entire goal of spiritual practice and cultivation is to achieve exactly this awakening. It's the ultimate tool. Why? Because activating this perception is the exact mechanism that shatters those fixed physical laws of unawakened destiny. It's like it takes the steering wheel away from those external forces we talked about and puts it entirely into your own hands. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the dramatic, incredibly empowering contrast it shows us. On one side, you have unawakened destiny, which is bound by fate, totally predictable, and completely fixed. But on the flip side, you have awakened destiny. The text explicitly states that once your spiritual perception is awakened, even the absolute greatest fortune teller becomes completely powerless to predict the course of your life. And why is that? Because an awakened individual can change at any given moment. They can transform in a myriad of ways. They're no longer just some planet trapped in gravity, They are completely 100% spiritually liberated.
Moving right along to section 3, the celestial realms, an ascension through virtue.
So, what actually happens when this life ends? The framework maps out the 5 highest spiritual trajectories exactly as the source describes them, and it's a fascinatingly precise equation. For instance, the greatest health equals land celestial beings, while utmost benevolence actually makes you a Buddha. If a person embodies the greatest love, the text states they'll become super celestial beings. Cultivating the greatest happiness turns you into deity celestial beings. And finally, the greatest kindness results in becoming human celestial beings. It's not random at all. It's this exact spiritual cause and cosmic effect. Next up is section 4, earthly and human returns, which we can kind of think of as the middle path. For those who aren't ascending to those highest celestial realms, so the crucial point is how everyday, highly relatable human virtues logically translate to specific earthly rewards in the next life. According to the text, if you live a life of the greatest loyalty, you're going to ascend to nobility in your next iteration. Those who are deeply filial to their parents will return to life with great blessings. Now, if you maintain an impartial mind, meaning you have this beautifully balanced, objective perspective, you simply return right back to the human world. And those who have actively built up their virtues over time, they are rewarded by returning wealthy. The framework really presents this not as some random game of chance, but as a direct, rational transaction between your character right now and your circumstances later. And finally, that brings us to Section 5, descending to lower realms and the weight of negativity. Just as positive traits elevate a soul, the text directly correlates negative earthly mindsets and actions with some pretty severe descents. And again, it's highly specific. A muddle-headed or confused mind leads straight to the animal world. Deep indifference actually causes reincarnation into the plant world, which is quite a literal interpretation of vegetating if you think about it. Those harboring wicked intentions sink down into the ghost world. And then the text reserves these elemental punishments for active harm. People who have lorded over and bullied others degrade to what the source calls the frozen layer. At the absolute bottom, those who are intentionally evil fall into the inflamed layer. So as you can see, it is a stark, totally unambiguous ledger of accountability. We've explored the physics of destiny, the sheer power of awakening, and this very strict hierarchy of reincarnation outlined in the text. But before we wrap up, the source material leaves us with one final, super intriguing instruction. It doesn't just ask you to blindly believe this whole framework. Instead, the text's final challenge is actually an invitation. It says, please verify these standards with those who have awakened spiritual perception. It leaves us with a deeply provocative thought to chew on. If awakened individuals really do walk among us, completely free from that fixed orbit of destiny, how might we recognize them? And if we found them, what truths about our own trajectories might they reveal? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I'll see you next time.